Welcome to Miss Bizz's Guide to Combat Basics in Elder Scrolls Online Part 2. If you haven't watched my very first Combat Basics video, be sure to do so you understand the first basics I taught you. We're going to be diving a little bit deeper to a little bit more advanced things this time around. The first thing we're going to be talking about is the difference between AoE's, which means area of effect, and single target. This covers actually heals and damage dealing skills. AoE's, like I mentioned, stand for area of effects. This means that they actually cover an area, often on the ground, where they will do their effects. Here I'm going to show you luminous shards that actually damaged both the bugs in that area where it landed, and then I use Wall of Elements, which damages the bugs as they walk through that area. That is an area of effect. So whenever they're in the area I put it down to, they're going to be affected. In this case, they're going to be damaged. Mobs, or enemies, also have area of effect abilities, and you can tell what these are when you see the big red circles or red cones on the ground. Stay out of them. Here I'm showing you Javelin. This is a single target spell, which means it will only damage the mob that I directly throw it at. Generally, AoE's are more effective against a group of mobs, whereas single target spells are more effective against a single target. That is because an AoE will damage multiple mobs at once, which is great when there's a group of them, but single target spells are usually stronger and hit harder. Many AoE's are also DoT's, which is damage over time. This means it's actually helpful to use both in all scenarios. You can lay down a dot, or many times an AoE that's also a dot, and then continue single target damaging your enemy. This way, the dot or AoE keeps damaging the enemy while you're also throwing different spells at it. There are also single target dots, which you can throw on one single enemy and let tick away while you continue using other spells on it. Some skills can actually be single target and AoE all at the same time. One example is Curse from the Sorcerer. This is a single target skill mostly, but when it explodes, it actually damages enemies in the area as well. Proc. It's probably a word you've heard and you might not know what it means. It's just when something causes something else to happen. For example, you can see that when I use frags, crystal frags, it has a cast time. This ability can actually proc from the usage of any other magicka ability, so it's a little bit random. When it procs, meaning it meets those requirements and it suddenly happens, there is no cast time on this ability. Item sets can also proc. You'll see this on item sets that say, this percentage of the time when this happens, this will happen. So whenever you're within that percentage of that thing happening and the effect actually happens, that is the item set proccing. The next thing I'll talk about is buffs and debuffs. Buffs are good and are something that apply to you and or maybe your allies as well. Debuffs are applied to the target and are bad for the target, which means good for you. In Elder Scrolls Online, buffs and debuffs are divided into two different categories, major and minor. Usually, the buff does the exact same thing, but the major buff does it better or stronger than the minor buff. Different buffs or debuffs can be stacked on yourself or on targets. The only time they don't stack is when you're trying to use two of the same major buff or two of the same minor buff. If you have one major buff and one minor buff, for example, Major Expedition coming from Rapid Maneuver and Minor Expedition coming from Hurricane, they will stack. But two people using Rapid Maneuver means you only get one buff because they are both Major Expedition buff. Another way you can get buffs is by actually just having skills on your skill bar. Some skills will give you, extra magicka as long as that skill is on your skill bar. If you want that buff on both of your bars, no matter which weapon bar you are using, you need to have that skill on both bars. Mostly, it's not necessary though. In some cases, though, it is important to have one skill on both of your weapon bars. This is because it may be a toggle skill, such as bound armor from the sorcerer or their pets. If you do not have it on both bars, you'll have to recast that item every single time you bar swap, and that's just senseless. Another combat basic in ESO is synergies. This is when someone else uses a skill, and when you actually do the synergy, which you can see my keybind is 3, but by default it is X, it causes another effect to happen. Synergies can make skills do more damage, you can regain resources, or maybe even gain a shield from it. That's all for my combat basics in ESO Part 2. If you have any combat basics tips, be sure to leave a comment below, or if you have any questions, you can ask those there too. If this video helped you out, make sure you leave a like, and if you want to see more, subscribe. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Miss Bizz. Bye for now.